I have a couple of studio guests joining me during this segment of the program. I have to tell you, law enforcement never sleeps because at 3:30 this morning, I sent an instant message to Ken Menzel from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department and said, "Hey, would you be available this morning?" And about 30 seconds later, I got a text message or an instant message back that said, "Yeah, I'll be available." Uh, so,
But you know the nice thing about that, Bill? He waited till 7:30 to ask me.
I did.
And of course, Captain Tim Miller joining us too as well in studio. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. That's because Ken was changing diapers, I suppose, at 3 o'clock this morning.
She actually kicked me out of my bed, and I was in the easy chair. So.
We'll get back to our two guests in just a moment. I do want to just quickly mention our good friend, Dr. Eric F. Jones, who's got a couple of offices here in Twin Falls, both relatively close to our studios, and he's using a holistic systemic approach to wellness. Been doing this nearly 25 years with master's and doctoral degrees in marriage and family therapy, and he uses methods of alternative healing, naturopathy, medicinal herbs, nutrition, sound waves, intellectual and cognitive self-regulation, and napathy to help remedy and manage mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual challenges as well. He's accepting new patients, and he has evening and Saturday appointments open. The number is 731-7178. He's also on Facebook, Eric F. Jones, PhD, mental health and wellness therapist, and I remind you again, that's Eric with a C. While the two of you are here, let me just share a comment with you quickly. The president spoke last night from Poland. I don't know why he didn't have the vice president do this after the two initial stories about the shootings in Minnesota and Louisiana. But then this morning he offered this about what happened in Dallas overnight. Take a listen.
When people are armed with powerful weapons, unfortunately it makes attacks like these more deadly and more tragic. And in the days ahead, we're going to have to consider those realities as well.
So I guess the only reaction he has is that, well, if we just take more guns away from people, this sort of thing won't happen. I just had a caller from Jerome a few minutes ago who said to me, likely these guys may have been already convicted felons and they got firearms anyway.
Yeah, I think that's the misnomer that the president's trying to put across. And it's the same theory. If somebody wants to break into your house, you can do everything you can to try and protect your property, but they're going to find a way to break in. And if somebody wants to do harm or commit crimes, they're going to find a way to do it, whether those firearms are illegal, illegally obtained, or whatever the situation may be. And like I said, I believe he's taken a wrong approach and have believed that from the beginning.
Isn't this the exact same rhetoric that he used shortly after the UCC shootings in Oregon? I mean, it was within just a matter of hours after the shooting occurred on campus that he was basically saying the same thing, push for increased gun control instead of looking at what the issue was.
It's like these five brave men in, and I guess at the moment I say men, there may have been some women involved too, but we don't know all of the identities yet. But it's almost as if saying that, look, they're not even cold yet. And the only response is, well, we need more gun control.
Well, it's interesting that he, since he's been in office, he's taken, just recently, recalled all the equipment that was provided through the military to protect us, protect law enforcement. An example last night would have been utilizing one of the armored vehicles to go and rescue the citizens or the officers that are down, but can't because he recalled those, saying that they were too militaristic and we couldn't use them.
Chief Brown even mentioned that in his news conference this morning. He said, we're not militarized. Right. And he brought that up. That caught my attention because right away you're thinking, it wasn't all that long ago that we would have had SWAT teams and special response teams. Everyone would have been rolling in and they would have been in their gear and had a lot more protection as well.
Well, it's not that we want to give the appearance of being militaristic, but there's a time and a place to make sure that we're protected properly and adequately so that we can do our job and perform our function. And in an ever-increasing violent society, we need to be better equipped to make sure that we too, just like everybody else, are able to go home at night at the end of our shift to our families and enjoy the same protections that everybody else expects to be afforded. We understand this is a dangerous profession that we've chosen, but there's equipment out there to certainly make it a little more safer for us for the environment that we work in.
Sure. I want to point out, we'll take some telephone calls. A lot of people are trying to reach us this morning. We've got a short break coming up in just under a minute. Captain Tim Miller and Sergeant Ken Menzel are joining us from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department this morning, and they're here on short notice. We should point that out too. but they're available to take some of your telephone calls in the next half hour of the program. In the meantime, I just keep thinking back to something you told me, Captain, about 6 months ago, that in over 30 years of doing this, if you were starting all over again, you might not make this choice.
No, and that, when I went into it, of course, I was 19 when I started, and you think that you can change a community. And, now I've dropped back to maybe I can change somebody's life, make a difference in somebody's life. And um, because you can make a difference in a community, but then there's so many other factors that make that difference. And so I look at that when people have issues with police officers, and they want to generalize, that's what I try to do is minimize that and say, you know, I don't know you and I've never dealt with you, so don't pin that on me. Um, and that's how I look at it.
We've got more coming up with both the captain and the sergeant. Your telephone calls too as well. It's 8:30 and it's 70. Bill Colley with you as well on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. A couple of guests joining us in studio this morning, and we'll get back to them in just a moment. We're talking about the tragic shooting last night in Dallas. 5 police officers dead, several others wounded after some snipers opened fire. And the snipers, one of them negotiated or tried to negotiate with police for a while, or they tried to negotiate with him. And he claims that they were out to kill white people, and specifically white police officers. And it seems to be revenge for a pair of police shootings that took place hundreds, if not thousands, of miles away. It's 8:34. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. Just a quick note. Next Wednesday morning, we'll have in studio one of the medical professionals from Tripp Family Medicine right here in Twin Falls. That between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. We call it Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine. The doctor will be out because the doctor and his family are on their way. They'll be jetting off to Nicaragua for a mission trip for a few days. We've been sharing some of the details with you on that. They don't any longer need any more donations. However, when they return, his sons who are on the trip also still owe him some money for their plane flights. So if you are looking for someone to maybe mow the grass or clean the pool or do a little work around your house this summer, the remainder of the summer, Dr. Tripp's sons are available, and you could drop by the office and get more details about all of that. First of all, I want to mention Sergeant Ken Menzel and Captain Tim Miller are in studio with us this morning from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department, and the telephone number is 736-0300, 736-0300. You heard me say earlier that if we had a day where all law enforcement just decided to stay home, people would get a whole new appreciation of all this. It's not going to happen, obviously, but it almost, I've been told so often that I had friends who used to patrol in inner cities and various places, and they said, if no one cooperates with you in the first place, you're not going to have a very good relationship with them. And I think that we often overlook that too.
Well, and we always say that we don't, people don't appreciate us unless we don't just show up somewhere. We're usually dispatched there or we're called. People don't want us unless they have a problem. And we find that many times we get called to a domestic fight by a spouse, and then both of them don't want us there. Okay, then why'd you call us? If even though we are bound by law that we have to be there at that domestic violence situation, or we can turn around and be sued civilly. I mean, it's a catch-22 for us.
We have a caller looking to join us, and caller, you're on the air with the captain and the sergeant. Good morning.
Good morning, guys. First and foremost, we'd like to thank you for your service. I know nobody likes being pulled over or dealt with, and at that time you're the enemy, but you are someone that helps us out. But I think that the thing that people don't understand is law enforcement's under heightened alert with all the stuff that's been going on and all the lies that have been spread about the police department. You see all these interactions that turn ugly, and they blame the cop. But even if when you watch the videos, 90% of the time they're fighting the police officers and not obeying the commands. Now, this shooting in the car the other day, we don't know all the scenario, but it is a tragic, sad deal. But the lies that the Black Lives Matter people have spread has caused this, and I blame it right to Barack Obama that that got this whole Black Lives Matter thing hyped up, and he's the one that's caused the problems.
I was talking with my wife last night. Um, whether it be Hispanic or any other nationality, we don't hear the outcry if one is killed in a police shooting like we do if it's the black and the white. And I haven't experienced it myself, but um, and in traveling the country when I was teaching a lot, um, there's no place like home. I'll take that from Dorothy. We are fortunate to live in a community or a state that people communicate, I think, better.
Hmm.
Um, and I haven't seen the tensions like they do in some of the other areas. But I have to agree that I believe a lot of it is fueled by our leaders, whether they be local community leaders or a national leader.
And I think on the local level, we have that we have that support that you're not seeing in other places.
Absolutely. I don't know that I would still be wearing a badge if I was a law enforcement officer, such as Dallas or Baltimore, some of these other areas that have the tensions that are going on. We're fortunate, so very fortunate and blessed to be doing what we're doing here in the Magic Valley because by and large we do have such tremendous support from our community. Not to say that, as our community continues to evolve and change, we're seeing some of that national rhetoric slowly creep in. And we see some of the individuals that we deal with in a recidivistic type form where they're continually breaking the law that
Hmm.
really aren't real happy to see us when we get called to take care of a theft in progress or whatnot. But by and large, it really is a great place to work, and it's one of the reasons why I still stay in this line of work because of where I'm at.
We'll be continuing our conversation with both Sergeant Ken Menzel and Captain Tim Miller from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department in just a few minutes. It's 20 minutes away from 9 o'clock, and it's 70. We'll take more of your telephone calls as well. Hope you can stick around. A lot more on this subject today. And, of course, on a day like today, there really is no other subject. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. The show is Top Story with Bill Colley. Our studio guests are having a conversation with us this morning just about some of the challenges that modern law enforcement has, especially following what happened tragically in Dallas last night, where you had 5 officers shot and killed while they were actually trying to provide security at a Black Lives Matter event. And our telephone number, if you'd like to reach the show today, is 736-0300, 736-0300. Captain Tim Miller and Ken Menzel, Sergeant Ken Menzel, are in the studio with us from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. Our first caller of this segment joins us. You're up next. You're on the air.
Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Bill, on C-SPAN this morning, a guy called in and mentioned the names of the work people on Morning Joe and others in the Shamestream media that always do lopsided reporting. They never report stories like the young, beautiful woman that was killed in San Francisco by a catch-and-release illegal. White privilege is a fact that most white kids have an identifiable father and mother. The biggest disadvantage for thousands of blacks is that they have an unmarried mother, 15, 14, or 16, who never finished school or had an entry-level job, so she could pass on information and good advice to their child.
Well, thank you for the call. And I think part of the problem in a lot of these communities is people don't want to talk to law enforcement. They're hostile to begin with, right? And so there's no communication, as you pointed out earlier, that we have here.
Well, one of the things that we're working towards changing is something that happens. I think the area I see it most often is we're coming up upon the fair,
Right.
and I can't tell you how many times we'll walk through the fairgrounds in groups and providing security for all the people that are there. And comment will come from the left or from the right. Somebody says, "Hey, you see those 2 officers? If you don't behave, I'm going to have them take you to jail." And that's not the message we want these young children to learn. And so many times I sit down with the young child at that point and hand out a sticker or something and say, if you ever need us, don't be afraid to come to us because we're here
Right.
to help you and try and counteract that negative
And
message.
the
that
parents don't even
parents-
realize that they're making that sort of a message or creating that message.
Right.
Yeah, you're putting a fear in, and you'll see the school resource officers. That's one of the purposes of that program is to break down the barriers and provide a role model for um, youth that are troubled. Uh, I did 5 years as a school resource officer, and that was probably one of my greatest career um, moves is trying to make a difference in some of the kids' lives.
We have another caller with us. And caller, you're up next. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Go ahead.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you very much for protecting the community.
Thank you.
The Japanese, it's a rumor, I haven't validated it. One of their leaders said that the reason they did the attack the United States was because there was a gun behind every tree. On the other hand, Adolf Hitler took away the guns of the German people. Then he was able to subdue them. Switzerland, as far as I know, doesn't have the multitude of crime and gun killings that we do. And every person in Switzerland at a certain age is required to own and know how to use his gun. I'll listen off air. Thank you.
Can I add to that too? Because realistically, I mean, it's not going to happen. But let's just say tomorrow, everybody who owned a firearm outside of law enforcement, their firearms just vanished. Your jobs might be easier for a while, but people are still going to get into domestic disputes with fists and boards and knives and the like. But for a time, there might be things that were quieter and calm. But we all know in reality, that's never going to happen. So there's always going to be, you just have to factor that into your jobs, right?
Absolutely. It's a violent society that we live in, and you can factor out the gun aspect of it, and it's not going to take away the violence. We You can kill somebody with a knife or a vehicle or whatever just as easily as you can with a firearm. I don't know that the firearm is particularly the issue here. I think it's a society of violence.
We have another caller with us. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air with Captain Miller and Sergeant Menzel.
Good morning. Well, there's been a drive clear back in the 60s to create a national police force and disarm the people. And I belong to an organization, and once again, it's support your local police and keep them independent, because that's the whole hallmark of a dictatorship, is to create a national police force. And you can see that's what's behind this whole thing. Take away all the authority of the local police, the sheriff, and just come in and set up a national Gestapo, if you would. And this is ongoing. What the comment too is Black Lives Matter, except in Chicago. Blacks are killing blacks and shooting blacks at a tremendous rate. We hear nothing about that. I'd like them to comment about that. And I want to compliment our local police and sheriff departments here for the great service that they render. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate those comments.
We really don't have to deal with a lot of those issues because we're such a homogenous, I guess, part of the country, right?
Well, and I think I look at Boise. Some of the violence is starting to escalate a little bit there, but I see that as an influx of population. And as Boise grows and Nampa and that whole Treasure Valley metro area, that's going to be a hot pot in the future. Um, we all, people ask about, what's a crime like in Twin Falls? We have the same crimes that these big cities do. We just don't have the frequency. Um,
But we are growing that way as we continue to see Twin Falls grow. I mean, 15, 20 years ago, by and large, we were mostly what? Agriculture. And we're seeing big business come in. Chobani's the world's largest yogurt manufacturing plant is located here in Twin now. We've had a hotbed of topics that are discussed frequently in the community and on your show with regard to things such as the refugee program. And as we continue to see things change in our community, the sleepy little farm town of Twin Falls, Idaho, that dealt primarily in agriculture, we're seeing that some of these hot topics, we're getting some national notice. And that changes the dynamic of our community.
We have another caller with us. We do want to point out we have Ken Menzel. He's the sheriff of the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department, and Tim Miller, he's a captain with the department. They're joining us until 9 o'clock this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And it's 8:50. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story. And we're at 69. You're on the air.
Well, one of the things I think is a problem is as we perpetuate the victim mentality, and let's face it, this administration wants to perpetuate it so they can so those people will want to rely on government. But when a victim who thinks he's a victim gets arrested, then they think they're being mistreated. And then they think that, well, by God, we're not going to take this from anybody. And you see this kind of thing, this victim mentality across our nation. And then, they just think that, it's a very disturbing thing to be arrested, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
And so, yes. And then when you have immigrants, from whether or not they're from the Middle East or Mexico or wherever, but mostly there, I would just straight up say it, they come from in some cases, a chaotic society, and law and order isn't part of the deal. And so those things are adding to the destruction, in some cases, of our society and making your jobs harder. Thanks.
I think that a lot of people out there, I just remember a story when I was growing up as a kid. My brother and one of his friends were out shooting off bottle rockets, driving down the street, dropping them out the windows, and they got
That's
picked
wrong.
up. Yeah,
Can't do that.
They got picked up, and we lived on top of a hill, and if you went around the corner from our house and went down the hill, 2 doors down was the police station. And of course, all they did was simply brought my brother home,
Right.
and then they stood there at the front door with him, and the police officer knew my mother very well, and uh, he was not necessarily afraid of getting arrested, but he was afraid of having to deal with my mother.
Right.
And there was a lot more of that, I think, than we have today. I mean, we were raised in a different sort of community.
You're right. We were. Things have changed. It's not infrequent that the sheriff's office receives phone calls dealing with incorrigible youth, and rather than parents taking care of the issue, uh, not only are we police officers, but we're counselors. Sometimes we're babysitters.
Boy, the
Um,
one that gets me is the one that calls and says, I can't get my 7-year-old up to go to school.
right.
It's like, excuse me. They call us wanting us to handle that.
Try homeschooling. Uh, we have a comment that we were talking about off air a few minutes ago. Keith Thompson was here yesterday, and he pointed out that he thinks part of the problem now has become for police officers is that the fallout from this is going to be worse because he said now you've got people on the job and they're thinking about it too much after when they pull someone over, and there's going to be a hesitation, and you're going to see more people on the law enforcement side end up tragically either getting wounded or losing their lives because of this.
How's the review committee going to perceive my shooting if you're involved in something?
Right.
How is this going to look to the community? If I pull the trigger, am I going to be able to keep my job? Am I going to be able to continue to support my family? As we see these incidents occur throughout the nation, those are certainly thoughts that rest in the minds and in the hearts of our local law enforcement. And I venture to say that, yeah, when we're dealing with an enforcement type situation, whether it's a traffic stop or we're in a home where a domestic violence situation has occurred or so on, um, we really have to make sure that we're doing it right. And it falls back on our training. We just hope that the chips will lie where they lie, and that at the end of the day, it's viewed as we did what was right.
Think about this: a pitcher, starting pitcher in Major League Baseball, if he wins 2/3 of his games, gets a contract for $200 million. You guys have to be perfect every day because if you're not, you're before that review board.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And unfortunately, when we start looking at officers that have left the profession or maybe left an agency, the majority of those is because of disciplinary action. And, I'm not looking at it that we are headhunters, but we got to police ourselves.
Yep.
And we're trying to provide the best service and the best person for the community. And many times, a lot of these behaviors don't show up until after somebody's hired. And so, again, it's a weeding out process, and we want to provide the best service
With the best
and,
people.
and provide the best image for our community.
Got a couple of minutes left. We have another telephone caller with us. Caller, you're up next on KLIX. Go ahead.
Thank you, Bill. Hey, I just wanted to tell the officers that I really do appreciate what they do.
Thank you.
I know that several years ago in the 70s when I was doing the same job that I got in a scuffle and I had citizens stop and help. And I think there's a lot of that in Idaho. I think that you have a lot of citizen support. I don't think you have near the distaste as you do in some of the other areas.
I would agree with that.
And the only thing I was going to bring up is I had a kind of a funny story is that years back before I went into that job, when I was in the service, this was the only time I'd ever been in jail or had a bad encounter with law enforcement. As I was 18 and got drunk while I was in Hawaii and decided Samoan cops aren't as tough as they thought they are. And they really were.
I want to thank him for his call. Well, sometimes you have to learn the lesson the hard way, right?
That's true. Bill, I just want to mention too, I appreciate our veterans and everything they do. But one of the things that, you sit and you hear people recognize for veterans, we're not looking for recognition. It's just people need to be aware that we're also here protecting freedoms locally.
Mm-hmm.
And, the public safety, anybody that's in public safety, whether it be EMS and fire, we're public servants in the fact that we're here to protect, and we're not here to be heavy-booted thugs. And if that is happening, those are the type of people that we want out of law enforcement.
I was going to say the job still has some rewards, right? I mean, the two of you keep doing it, so there's got to be something that gets you out of bed to go back to it on a regular basis.
Absolutely.
I look at it the same as what I did when I started. Is if I can make a difference in somebody's life, and if I can make somebody smile once a day, then to me that's a fulfillment for me. Tonight we got Kimberly Good Neighbor Days this weekend. They have a free dinner, and I go over and help with that, and I help with the parade tomorrow. I don't even live in that community anymore. I've worked in there, but I'm still feel that I'm part of that community.
We do want to point out that the two gentlemen in studio with us have a hard job, and they've got to return to it. But we want to thank both Captain Tim Miller and Sergeant Ken Menzel for coming in on short notice today, as I pointed out. We sent Ken a message at 3:30 this morning, and sure enough, he was already awake, so law enforcement never sleeps in this community. We've got a short break coming up for news in just a moment at 9 o'clock from Fox, and plenty more of Tom's Story ahead with Bill Colley. Next hour, we'll talk a little bit more about this. A couple of comments I want to share with you from some of the witnesses who actually saw what took place in Dallas last night.